myself and Yiling, then you can put to host and panelists. But if you want everybody to see it, just make sure you send your message to everyone. And I see we have a couple people joining us so far. Hello, Carol. Hello, Lenita. Hello, Max and Stephanie and Christine. And so far, everyone's joining us from Orange County, Apopka, Orlando, and Castleberry, all right here in the Central Florida area. So we will be getting started at 2 o'clock in just a couple minutes. So just hang tight here. And we are also streaming live on Facebook. Okay, looks like the buttons are working. That's great. And if you are joining us by Zoom, make sure to check out our Water Central Florida Facebook site. It's at Water Central Florida here on the screen. And you can follow us on Facebook and learn all about water in Florida. It's a great topic. We never run out of things to talk about. And Lenita's asking, are these saved on Facebook after to watch other classes? And yes, they are. And they can also find them on the YouTube channel, which I just shared. Hi, Jeanette, welcome.
I will put the link in the chat box and on Facebook shortly.
Okay.
I'm getting everything set up on the Facebook end and share to more gardening groups. So just be patient with me. We'll start at 2 o'clock.
Okay, sounds good. It is a beautiful day and starting to get hot outside. So it's a good time for a little afternoon webinar.
All right, it is 2 o'clock. Let's get a party started. Hi, everyone. My name is Yiling Zhuang. I'm the Water Resources Regional Specialized Agent in UF IFAX Extension Central District. I'm based in Mid-Florida Research and Education Center in Apopka. So I see some attendees from Apopka and a lot of, actually most of our attendees from Zoom is in the greater Orlando area. So that's perfect because our guest speaker for today is Miss Tia Savisi. She is the Floridafriendly landscaping agent in Orange County. So she will give us a talk about microirrigation for vegetable gardens. So now let's welcome Tia.
All right, yay, thank you. Happy to be here today. And I love this Water Wednesday program. It is happening, you can check our schedule on the Facebook, 2 p.m. on Wednesdays. And today I'm going to talk about micro irrigation for vegetable gardens, because this is one of the most efficient styles of irrigation you can install. And as Yiling said, my name is Tia Salvesi, and I'm located at the UF IFAS Extension Office over in Orange County, which is located down on South Conway Road, kind of by the International Airport. So next time you're taking a flight out, plan extra 15-minute visit stop and visit our extension center. And we do have quite an extensive micro irrigation system in our demonstration vegetable garden at our extension center. So it's a really cool thing to see. And our garden is free and open to the public. So let me get started with a little background about our water supply. And here in Florida, we are very rich in water. In Florida, like we kind of have two terms. We have surface water and we have groundwater. And so as you know, here in Florida, we have a lot of really long, huge rivers, short rivers, some streams and stuff like the St. John's River. So over 10,000 miles of rivers. We have over 7,800 lakes and lots of lakes in Central Florida. And we hear a lot about this in the news with the fertilizer ban and stuff to protect that water. We also have a lot of diverse wetlands, you know, both freshwater wetlands and saltwater wetlands. And don't forget about our ocean, you know, surrounding us and our estuaries. So these are all considered, you know, types of surface water. You can see them, you know, with the naked eye from the surface, the water. And then we also have what we call groundwater. And in fact, most of Florida's water is underground. And if you ever go to the springs, like Wekiva Spring here in Orlando, you'll just see that crystal blue water, you know, bubbling up from the earth. And that's from our aquifer. So the groundwater, that provides almost 95% of the water that we use for drinking and bathing and flushing and household activities. And we have really good groundwater here. It's among the best in the nation. So it's important that we really value our water resources and learn about them and visit them and appreciate them, because there's a saying that we protect what we love. Another water resource we have in Florida is our rainfall. And you can see this, the NOAA graph here that shows you how much rainfall we get in different parts of the state. And kind of Central Florida, a lot of it's kind of that yellowish color, 50 to 55 inches per year. And so, you know, kind of just averaging it out, we're just going to say 52 inches of rainfall per year to make the math easy. We have 52 weeks in a year. And if our rainfall was distributed evenly across the whole year, then our plants would get about 1 inch of water per week, which is what they like. They like about 1 inch of water, you know, for established plants. However, it's not evenly distributed in the year. You know, June, July, August, we have like 8 inches per month. January, February, March, we have more like 1 to 2 inches per month. And so when we don't have adequate rainfall, that's when you might think about adding some supplemental irrigation, you know, either hand watering or some type of irrigation system. Additionally, I want to bring up some threats to our water supply. And one of them is nutrient pollution, contamination from nutrients and other pollutants. And you can see this picture here at Ishnatucky Springs State Park back in 1995. You know, the water is more blue and there's more beneficial, like that eelgrass in there. That's a beneficial aquatic plant. And then here, the second picture from 2012, the water is still clean and beautiful, but it's just a little bit more green and there's some algae growing in there. So nutrients increase the algae growth. And so that's why we want to try to use proper fertilization and irrigation, because irrigation can carry the nutrients and that will minimize the pollution in our springs and our lakes. Another threat to our water is just simply supply. So, you know, this is a report from the 2070 water report, and like, will we have enough water in the future? You know, will your children's children have enough water to do their normal activities like we do? And so, we're a couple years behind on the statistics here because it takes us a while to gather them all. But like in 2010, you can see at the top, water consumption for development, agricultural uses across the state was 5.3 billion gallons per day. And in this study, looking into the future, it's estimated that we will need 8.1 billions of gallons per day in the year 2070. So that's quite a significant increase. Do we have enough supply for the increasing demand in our increasing population growth? We're not sure. Actually, there is a gap. We are not going to have enough water for the future. And so one thing that we need to do is start being more conservative of our water use and really focus on water conservation, because we could do some improvement in that area. So as I mentioned, I'm the Florida-Friendly landscaping agent here in Orange County, and Florida-Friendly is a great program, a University of Florida program in partnership with the Department of Environmental Protection. And our motto, more or less, is, you can have a beautiful landscape and still protect the environment. You can conserve water, you can fertilize appropriately, recycle yard waste on your property, and do other things to help the wildlife and the biodiversity, and just have a ecologically friendly landscape. And so there's 9 principles, and you kind of follow them all together. But today, with this irrigation webinar, we're more going to be focusing on principle number 2, which is to water efficiently. So we're going to be talking about micro irrigation and how it's one of the most efficient ways to water. So what does efficient irrigation mean anyways? Well, this is delivery of water to where the plant needs it. So we want to water the plants. We don't want to water the driveways and the pathways and the roads. And then we want to use low volume irrigation where appropriate. And when you're watering like a huge lawn or a golf course, then you might need a more high volume irrigation. But when you just have some smaller pots or a raised garden bed, then low volume irrigation is appropriate. And that's what micro irrigation is considered. Another thing we need to look at is adjusting the irrigation a couple times a year, like for the weather and for the seasons, because right now in May, the springtime, April, May, June, is you need to watch your irrigation and make sure it's working properly, because we go through some dry times. But during the summer, rainy months, we're getting more than enough water, so you can shut off the irrigation at that time. Also, in the winter time, plants are going dormant. They're growing slowly. The days are very short. Our turf grass is not actively growing. So, you can skip a week in the winter or reduce the irrigation in the winter. That's also required for watering restrictions according to your water management district. And another thing that people should know is that as your plants grow and become established, then they have a more extensive root system. They can tap their roots down into water supplies, deeper in the earth, and they are going to be more drought tolerant and require less watering. So here is a picture of our vegetable garden at our extension office here in Orlando and Orange County, if you get a chance to visit. And so, a couple more tips to water efficiently is just, go out and look at your plants. Just don't set and forget your irrigation system. See if there's any leaks, see if your plants are getting enough water, see if they're maybe getting too much water. We had a situation where we had a leak in a pipe somewhere, and it was just kind of saturating the soil. And then our green beans were declining, and we were trying to figure out what was wrong with them. But as soon as we fixed that, wet spot, they rebounded and they were healthy again. And then also to design the irrigation system to fit your garden layout. And so this is half of the garden here. And you can see the little microsprays in these little containers and in the little square gardens. And then we have drip irrigation where we have longer rows. And as I mentioned before, like adjust the irrigation as the plants get established. Seedlings will need to be watered more, whereas older, more established plants, you can water them less. So when thinking about the design of the irrigation system, you have to think of like, what is your garden layout? So here's some 3 different garden types here. The one on the right is row crops, maybe a tractor made these rows. And so they're very long and straight. And then the one here in the middle is kind of like organized chaos. There are some things growing that's not very clear lines. And then the one here on the right, these have some interesting shaped, triangle beds that are maybe set up in a circle with the wooden borders and the mulch in between. And so you could use different types of irrigation systems for these. I would probably use the drip irrigation for the one with long rows, and then maybe some microsprays or bubblers for the other 2. But you can draw it out and see what it looks like on paper. So let's get into it now. Micro irrigation. So what is micro irrigation? Well, as the name implies, it is kind of small irrigation. It's for more compact sites. It's very kind of detailed in the watering. It's not like your turf grass where you just spray the whole yard, because we're really trying to deliver the water where the plants need it, and often to the root zone instead of having it spray up into the air and be lost to evaporation. And this can be a very efficient method of watering. It's like 80 to 90% efficient. So that's really good. And it's just generally like a more low volume, low flow system than the traditional spray irrigation or like overhead irrigation. So it does conserve water. The benefits of micro irrigation is that it reduces your weed populations because it only really waters, your vegetables where you want them. It helps to prevent plant disease because a lot of these water at the root zone or near the root zone, it's not getting like the whole plant wet, and the water on the plant leaves can lead to increased fungal diseases, and just reduced evaporation, thus conserving water. So next I'm going to go into 4 different types of micro irrigation, and there may be more types than this. I'm just gonna, this is more of a class for beginners, and so these are kind of like the 4 basic categories, but if you're a lumper or a splitter, you can combine them or separate them. The 4 types of micro irrigation I'm going to go over today is the drip line, which is pictured here, where you just have a long row and it's a drip tubing or a drip tape. Drip emitters, microsprays, and bubblers. So let's get on with it. So here is the drip line, and these have a lot of different names: drip line, drip tubing, drip tape. It's not quite the same as a soaker hose. I don't really include the soaker hose in the talk today because they're just kind of problematic, and I wouldn't really recommend them unless you just have a real small area, but they biodegrade pretty quick here in Florida. So it's better to invest in a little bit of drip tubing. And the way these work is just like a long coil, like think of a hose, shrink down, and then it has little holes in it or emitters where the water comes out that are spaced, evenly across the whole tube line. So it can be up to like 300 feet long. You can have one very long straight row, and then you can buy them with the emitters at the different spacing, 6 inches, 9 inches, every foot, every 18 inches, or every 2 feet are commonly sold drip tapes. And it does come available in different diameters, 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. So If you have, smaller type of plants, the small one's fine. If you're trying to feed a row of, fruit trees, you might go with the bigger drip tubing. And the flow rate is very low, 0.5 to 1 gallon per hour. And where's the large irrigation systems, the overhead sprinklers, they talk about gallons per minute. And so the drip and the micro, we're looking at gallons per hour. So very conservative of water, but it really puts the water right where you need it. You can see from these pictures here, the green beans on the left, they're just the seedlings here. And you can see the drip emitter, and the water, just spreads out. You can see a little better on the picture to the right here with these Seminole pumpkin squash plants, where the water from the drip line, even though the emitters are, about every 8 inches on the system, it still soaks out, 1 foot either direction of the line. So it doesn't really matter which side of the plant that you have the line on, but you want to keep it, 1 to 2 inches away from the plant. And you might want to staple it down with some landscape stakes. So the drip is good when you have row crops. If you have several rows next to each other, you can put several lines. In our vegetable garden, we have 8 rows over like a 20-foot area. So we have 1 row, every 2 or 3 feet there. Very efficient and good for like straight rows. And I had pictures of seedlings, but these are also good for established plants. So look at these big colored greens here and the tomatoes next to it on the trellis. So this is putting out enough volume of water and wetting the whole root zone so that the vegetable can be thoroughly irrigated by the drip system. Now, something that you might want to remember is when you have the baby plants, you might want to have more frequent irrigation and less duration. So example, if you were like hand watering your baby seedlings, you might water them once every morning or twice a day, once in the morning and once afternoon, but maybe only for 5 or 10 minutes each watering time. But when you get to the larger vegetables, then you might want to run the drip system for 45 minutes, but just 2 times a week. And then that water will really, soak in, up and down and around to provide enough water for that plant and encourage a healthy, deep root system. And then I just want to show this picture on the right. So when you come to the end of the drip line, or here, we have the rows laid out. At the end of each row, we're going to have one of these little drip plugs. And if you don't have one of that, you can just kind of bend the line backwards and put a twisty tie on it, kind of like you would kink a hose. And here's our little landscape stake that we're using to hold it down. So this class is mostly about vegetables, but I just wanted to show that this drip irrigation could also be used for fruit trees. So you can see the water coming up, and then they are doing 2 loops around the tree. They could even do another loop around the tree to get that whole area, because for fruit trees, you really want to water right out to the drip line of that tree. So it is versatile, and you can use it for odd shaped beds too, but I find it easiest for the row crops. So next I'm going to talk about drip emitters. And so this is different from the drip tape, because instead of just having the emitter at that spacing, 6 inches, 9 inches, 12 inches, you can kind of custom design and put the drip emitter where you want it, so from the main line, the poly pipe, whatever the 1/2-inch supply line, you can insert these little spaghetti tubes, the black tubing, and then put this drip emitter on the end of it exactly where you need it. So this is good if you have, kind of a sporadic plant in the garden and you don't need to water the whole way, but you're just like, all right, that plant needs some water. This plant over here needs some water. And it's good for potted plants too. You can just put it up on a little stake in the garden. And like, just like the drip line, this drip emitter, you put it at the base of the plant and it waters the roots and it helps to keep the foliage dry and, prevent disease. These do come in different sizes. So, depending if it's a herb or a vegetable or a shrub or a tree, you can get different flow rates ranging from half a gallon to up to 24 gallons per hour, which is a lot of water. So here's the drip emitter again, and you can use it in potted plants like this herb garden here with the sage and the rosemary, and you just attach it to a little stake that you just put in the pot. So you could have the poly pipe running around the garden and then just put this in, one per pot or two if you have a large pot, and it works really good. So the next type of micro irrigation I'm going to discuss are these microsprays. And this is very popular. The drip line, the microsprays are very popular, and you can find these for sale in all kinds of, big box stores or hardware stores. And there's quite a large variety of them. So they're available in different watering patterns. They have different little stakes or risers that you can clip to. This one has an on-off valve, inside of that green spaghetti tubing there. So say you don't have anything in the garden at this time, you can just turn that little black on-off valve and cut off the water. Or if you're going out of town for the summer, you just want to shut it off, you can do that. And the spray, the little micro spray heads, they come in a variety of sizes. Usually they just water like a 2 to 4 foot circle around the sprayer, but you can buy some that can spray all the way up to 25 feet. So if you have a larger vegetable garden, you might want to get something like that. These are good for low growing vegetables like carrots or radishes or leafy greens. Because their spray is kind of low, and then it can get over the foliage and water more evenly. If you have a taller vegetable, like a huge collard green plant that has big blocky leaves, then the first plant might block all of the spray, and then the plant next to it is going dry. So it's not really great for tall vegetables, and it's not good for things like squashes that are just prone to fungal diseases, like tomatoes don't like to get their leaves wet all the time. So be careful when you're designing things like that. Maybe go with a drip irrigation instead. So here's some examples from our garden. We have a little micro spray in the green beans. This one is the MaxiJet brand. You can see on the blue hose, and it comes on the little stake. This one does not have a little on-off valve, and then it sprays out of the spray head. Here is a little micro spray in our dill container garden. This is actually in our pollinator garden because the dill is host for a swallowtail butterfly. And this has a slightly different head for the micro spray, but also just on the stake and connected for the spaghetti tubing into the main supply line. The heads do have a lot of variations of spray patterns and heads. And so the micro jets, misters, spinners, or like sprinklers. So just look at the spray pattern and how much water it delivers, and how far out it is going to spray when you're looking at the products. Here's a couple more examples here. Here at the left, we have these rain barrels cut in half in our vegetable garden, and we actually have an irrigation timer hooked up to this, to go on a couple times a week. And then we have all the little micro sprayers on these little stakes, and they should actually be placed more towards the center of these pots, but we were just planting the new bean seeds, so we put them in the middle, but it's better to plant the micro spray in the middle for more even irrigation, because here you're going to get some overlap. The bed on the right is just a raised wooden vegetable garden bed. And you can see the poly pipe supply line, which we have an on-off valve there, so we can shut this whole bed off if we want. And then we have, you know, the little spaghetti tubing inserted into that poly pipe. And then going out to the riser with the micro. So each one of these is like 2x4 type of size, and they may have 1 or 2 microspray heads to irrigate that area. So there's a variety of different kits you can get. These are widely available now at your local hardware stores or big box stores or your garden centers, and also online. And so just read carefully, you know, because they vary in components and price, and see how big of an area it sprays. See how many like stakes it comes with, and make sure you get the kit that works best for you. And a lot of them do have the little nozzle adapter that you can use it to connect to your hose bib. So that's how you can get it, or you can connect it to your irrigation system, you know, like from here or into your hose bib. So the next type of micro irrigation is bubblers. And these might be my personal favorite. That's not scientific, but they are very versatile. They can put out a lot of water, like 0 to 26 gallons per hour. They're great for container gardens, or where you have a sporadic plant here or there, or if you have, you know, a dozen fruit trees laid around your yard, you can have your poly pipe and then run 1 bubbler, you know, 1 or 2 bubblers per fruit tree. And I really like these because most of them are adjustable. Again, check the brand, and you can just twist the top of it to make the flow rate increase if you need a little bit more water, or maybe, you know, your plant died and you want to shut off the water. So you just spin it the other way and make it completely turn off, like decrease it all the way to the point of being off. And they have a little larger holes than the Microspray or the drip line. So if you have like well water, or, you know, water that might have a little something in it, this might, you know, prevent some clogging. If you do have a lot of things in your water, you can put on a filter if you're using the drip or the Microspray, or just clean them out every once in a while, flush the system. So again, these can come in a variety of spray patterns, like the multi-stream spray here, kind of, you know, just a little stream in each direction. And that's a 360 one. It goes all the way around. They have some where they're just like half of it sprays one direction, kind of like the little bubbler fountain thing here on the right. And that works fine too. Again, you can twist it to reduce the water flow either way. And they come in the large sizes too. You'll hear about like the shrubblers, or this is a tree bubbler. And again, you can twist the head to allow more or less water. And so this is what you can use on some of your fruit trees. You know, you can stake them with the landscape pins and put 1 or 2 per tree, and those work really good, and they can deliver a lot of water. And then once your plant is established, or if we're in the wet season, you just twist it to the off position, and very low maintenance here, and very efficient, you know, watering right at the root zone where the plant needs it. So just a little comparison of these methods that I just mentioned. The drip line here, you know, they're good for row crops. Sometimes they get clogged. The drip emitters, you know, these are good, but they need to be plugged into the main tubing. So it can be a little time consuming for all that labor to install all these emitters where they're already pre-drilled here on the drip line. The Microsprays, these are probably the most popular method because they're pretty easy. You buy the little kit and then you just stake them around. So like lots of different kinds here, and they're good for those irregular shaped garden beds. Like if you have a circle garden bed or a triangle or a square or a raised garden bed or a square foot garden, those are good for those. And then the micro bubblers, you can use in all those same scenarios like the Microsprays, but these are good for the containers and then your vegetables and also shrubs and fruit trees. So you can find this online on the publication here, Efficient Irrigation for Florida-Friendly Edible Landscapes. You can scan the QR code with your phone, or you can put in the publication name, or just Google that, UF-IFAS, Efficient Irrigation for Florida-Friendly Edible Landscapes, to find this. And that document talks not only about vegetables, but also herbs and trees and shrubs and things like that. So very great resource, a lot of good pictures. And just to wrap up on the troubleshooting for the micro irrigation, some things you got to be careful at is the pressure might be too high and like blow out some of your lines. And so the micro irrigation, they function best at around like 15 to 30 PSI. That's pressure. And if you have a problem with the blowout, like if your pressure is too high, you just have to get one of these little pressure regulators. You can buy them online or at your local hardware store, and to 15 PSI or 30 PSI, and just put that at the beginning of the system in the line. So just be aware of that, be aware of the clogging, and you have to check them. So just a couple more tips to wrap it up for efficient irrigation. When you're starting your seedlings, instead of starting them out in your huge vegetable garden, start some of them in your flats, and then you're only using the water to water these little tiny flats. These are baby collard greens we were doing for Linda's 4-H program here at the extension office. And so they're in these flats for like a whole month before they even get transplanted into a 4-inch pot. So that's another way to conserve water. Another thing is make sure you're planting the right plant at the right time. Don't, like right now we're kind of getting into summer, so don't be planting, lettuce or kale or those tender leafy vegetables, because they're just going to need a ton of water. Like right now, May, June, July, look for the more drought tolerant plants that are adapted to the heat. Some of the pole beans and tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and some of the tropical spinaches and stuff. And in general, like all year round, you can be choosing low maintenance vegetables, things like collards and kale that just have a long life. They'll live for months, instead of days, like lettuce. And they develop, more extensive root systems, so they're considered to be more drought tolerant. Green beans are very low maintenance. Hot peppers, the cherry tomatoes, like these yellow pear pictured in the bottom left, like Swiss chard is a good choice. Onions, these are all relatively easy to grow and don't need a lot of water or like pest or disease problems. So you can get all the details about growing vegetables in Florida in the Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide. And this is available electronically on our EDIS website. Just Google Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide, EDIS or UF, IFAS, or you can scan the QR code here to reach this publication. If you do stop by our extension office, you can visit the plant clinic, and we have free copies of this there. And also, I can't emphasize enough to choose Florida-friendly cultivars like these Everglades tomato or the Seminole pumpkin. And, they have these types of Florida names because they are very Florida-friendly. The Everglades tomato, they can take the heat. They will produce these cute little cherry tomatoes all summer long. And they're very tasty and sweet. They're just very small, like smaller than a penny, you can see. And the Seminole pumpkin too, the Native Americans grow them along the St. Johns River, and these are very heat tolerant. You can grow them during the summer. They're more tolerant than other pumpkins to the pickle worm and other pests. They're not completely like bug free, but you know, they can handle a little bit more pest pressure, but you still check them for the caterpillars. And another tip is just to adjust your irrigation for the plant growth stages. So remember, when you have seedlings like microgreens, sprouts, they have a high relative water need. They need frequent watering in small amounts. You know, this goes for seeds, sprouts, young transplants, and your short-lived stuff too, like your annual fruits and vegetables. You know, lettuce lives for 30 days, green beans, 60 days. So they kind of have a high water need too. They need consistent water throughout their whole life, you know, during the growing season. And then once you get into the long-lived vegetables, you know, ones that live for several months, like the kale or the collards, pumpkin, like sweet potatoes, they might take half a year to 9 months to, you know, develop and mature. They, after establishment, have a relatively low water need, and they can just go on a regular watering cycle, you know, like your landscape plants, you know, once or twice a week. And they can handle some water stress, you know, that's along with your established perennials. Like for edibles, could be like pineapple or blueberries, blackberries, and your herbs when they're mature, you know, like the basil, the rosemary, chives, oregano. These are great plants that are real long-lived. And your established fruit trees too. Once they're established, they have a relatively low watering need. So when you have, you know, any type of irrigation system, it's not going to be maintenance free. You can see what's wrong in this picture here. This one seems to be watering like normal. It has like a little 1 foot zone here. We could lift up the stake a little higher and get it to water a little further away. But you can see this one here, something's wrong with it and there's no water coming out of it. So in that case, we might want to pop off the head, turn the system on, maybe get a little paper clip or try to blow it out or wash it out, flush it out. Because this little lettuce plant here is not getting any water. And this one too is just right outside of the watering. So, you know, check your water after you run it, while you run your system, and make little adjustments as needed. Sometimes you might have a bare spot and you need to just put one more water head in that area to get good coverage. And watering early, this is a requirement in most ordinances that you have to water before 10 a.m. or after 4 p.m. But the best time to water your vegetable garden is in the morning. And that way the plant can have the water supply going through the day. This limits the water loss due to evaporation, like all that water spray just poof up into the air. And you can still water in the evening, that's okay, but like water left on the leaves, especially tomatoes and squashes and some sensitive plants, you know, that can promote plant diseases. And then my final tip is my favorite, mulch. So mulch your vegetable garden. Some people don't really do this, but you can do it and it works just fine. Here we have the picture on the left is using just some leaf mulch, and that's fine. Your oak leaves or whatever, just on the surface of your vegetable garden is going to help to keep the weeds out and maintain the soil moisture from your irrigation. And here on the right, we're using a straw mulch. You know, after Halloween, everyone donates us their bales of hay. So we just lay that out in the rows, and that works beautifully to keep the weeds out, to conserve the moisture. And here we're growing the okra and the black-eyed peas, getting our summer crops going. And so this is a great tip for conserving soil moisture in your vegetable garden. So that concludes our presentation for today. I hope you learned a lot. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email me, Tia Silvesi, My email is here, tsobasi@ufl.edu. Stop by the Extension Center and visit our vegetable garden there. You can see all the micro irrigation in practice. And this webinar is being recorded today, and you can find this and other classes we've done in the Water Wednesday series on the YouTube channel, UF-IFAS Extension Water Resources. So thank you so much, and I will take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Tia. We have quite a bit of questions in the chat box. Let me scroll to the top. So the question, I think you answered that early in the slide, is how many gallons for hours for the Microsprays?
The Microsprays, they vary. So they can be between like 1 and like 20 gallons per hour. So it just depends how far it's going to be spraying and, you know, what system that you choose. So that's something to look at. The ones we have in our garden are like a Mr. Landscaper type of system. And so you can use that for reference when you're shopping around.
That's good. Another question, actually, I think this is asked a lot. Some manufacturers incorporate copper into the emitters to prevent root intrusion. Is the copper effective at preventing intrusion, or is this really not necessary? In other words, is root intrusion really a concern?
I would say the short answer to that is no, that the root intrusion is not a big concern, because most of these irrigation for micro is actually like above the ground. So the roots aren't going to like crawl up above the ground to try to get into the emitters. But sometimes like the drip line, we might cover it with the mulch or something. I haven't seen it really been a big problem in my experience with it.
Cool. Another question is there a formula to figure out how long and how often to water a raised garden bed with seedlings using a drip line?
Yeah, there is different calculations. They are kind of complicated, so I didn't get into it too much, but like I said, plants like about 1 inch of water per week. So if you are irrigating like 2 times per week, then aim for about a 1/2 inch of irrigation. If you have something like the Microspray where you can catch like in a little cup and measure that cup to see how much you're getting out of there. With the drip line, you could look at the specs and it will say how many gallons per hour. Usually the drip line you want to run for about a 1/2 hour. For like established plants, because of the low rate, you want to run a longer time. But what you can do is look at the spray pattern, like I showed you some of those overhead shots, and make sure, you know, that the drip is getting kind of to the drip line of the vegetable plants. You know, it should be, you know, 1/2 foot on each side, and that's how you know you're getting enough water. You can also kind of do the finger test and dig in there a little bit and check that way.
Yes, it's just like Tia said, it's a little bit complicated. I wouldn't call it complicated. It really depends. So
Yeah.
it depends on the situation. I think this question was also asked earlier, and Tia gave us a really good guideline how much water you need. I did a little bit search. I didn't find a formula in Florida, like in our UF-IFAS extension. I find the one table is from Penn State, which I will just put it in the chat box. That's it. It's like how long to run drip irrigation systems for vegetables. I'm not sure how adaptable it is for Florida because the climate is different. So always take that into consideration. Like because I like this publication has a table and show you like the run time. But again, the climate is different, the soil is different. So yeah, I will keep looking, see if I can, or we can ask some specialists to see if they can give us some formula.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I saw another question because earlier I have the same question. Where can we find Everglades tomato?
Oh, you can find them at some seed suppliers. We might have some at the extension office, or we can save our own seeds. Like we have some plants there, we can squish and get the seeds out, and you can take some of those home. So like email me about it, or look on some tomato supply companies online for the seeds.
Yeah, and in the chat box, so we have one attendee, David offered for some seeds. Thank you very much. He put his
Great.
email address in the chat box.
Yeah, we can do seed sharing. And same with the Seminole pumpkin, that can be kind of hard to find too. So, but they're all heirloom vegetables. So once you are growing them, then you can save the seed and share those seeds, and they make a ton of seeds. So a lot of abundance there.
Good, good. And I'm reading the next question. Zeroing in on water needs of individual plants. Is there an EDIS pub or other study that shows drip water requirements for various veggies stated in the terms of gallons per hour and frequency needed for drip or microsprays for different plants?
Yeah, and the short answer to that is no, we don't have like such a resource, because even within, you can get green beans that are ready in 55 days. You can get green beans ready within 75 days. So even within like a tomato, like you have cherry tomato, medium tomato, large tomato. So it's just like too kind of complicated to put together a specific table per vegetable. But you can kind of broaden the category and just be like, short-lived vegetables, longer-lived vegetables, and then water accordingly.
So any show and tell signs to know it's time to water?
The best thing to do is to look and observe your plants, like first thing in the morning or in the evening, like at sunset. And if they look, nice and perky and healthy in the morning and at the evening, then they should be good. If they are showing signs of wilt in the morning or the evening, that means they need some water. It is natural for vegetables, they're very kind of fleshy and have a lot of water in them. So like us standing out in the hot sun at noon or 1 o'clock, they might be wilty, even though they have enough water. But so once, the temperature cools, then that's the good time to check them.
Great tips. The next one is, the question is, my entire produce garden is in various containers, all the way up to 45 and 65-gallon fruit trees. Out of the 4 systems, would bubblers be the best?
Bubblers are definitely the best for the large fruit trees, and you can kind of put 1 or 2, per the fruit tree container, or even 3 if it's like a 65-gallon, like a huge pot. But it just depends what your smallest plant is. Like if you're starting a bed of carrot seedlings and there's a lot of little seedlings all small and spread apart, bubbler might not be the best. Maybe a microspray might be the best, but bubblers are pretty universal. So if you wanted to go all bubblers, then that would be fine.
Great, great. And I see another question here. It's also related to how much water we need. So that's from Eva. Is there some type of guide for how much water a vegetable needs? And do you recommend put plants with similar water needs?
Yes, we do recommend to put the plants with similar water needs, and there's a fancy scientific term for that called hydrozoning. So you want to hydro zone, and all your intensive water need plants, put them in one part of the yard. The ones that can be a little bit more drought tolerant, put them in the other part of the yard. And as for like a all-encompassing table or something, like I said, we don't really have such detailed information, but we more just go by general. But like, observe your plants, start with a watering program, try to measure the irrigation coming out if you can catch it somehow, and kind of go from there.
Great. And also, I think in your presentation, you mentioned Florida-friendly seeds. So where can we get these seeds? Are there any labels? Just say, hey, they are Florida-friendly.
No, that's not labeled. But if you look in some of our Florida-friendly edible publications, we have some lists and stuff in there. It depends if you're looking for vegetables or fruit trees or drought tolerant edibles. Just look up Florida-friendly edible landscaping, and there's some webinar recording and a couple publications on that topic.
Right. Here's the last question. Last question is from David. Is there any non-plastic ways to micro-irrigate?
Say that again. Any non-plastic? Plastic? Most of the drip and micro are using plastic. I think plastic is cheaper than metal and more available. I mean, hand watering is always an option, and just having that nice layer of mulch, that goes a long way. You don't really have to be watering like all the time. If you have a good amount of organic matter in your soil, that's going to help to retain the soil moisture, and then have a nice layer of mulch to protect the surface from evaporation. And so that's can definitely reduce your watering. But yeah, I don't know of any non-plastic ways.
Yeah, because on top of my head, I'm thinking most micro irrigation kits, they are all plastic. I can think of it now because plastic is much cheaper to make, and it's quite light. So for the transportation will be easier. Because that's a really good question. I also teach a certain science project to investigate how much plastic in our waterways. Somehow I never thought about all the micro irrigation. I wouldn't say all, but at least the majority we've seen, they're all plastic. That's a really good question. I will look into it. Thank you for this question.
The drip tubing, it has the least amount of like plastic parts and connections. Sometimes those Microsprays, it can be like you need the poly tubing 1/2 inch, and then you need the spaghetti tubing, and then you need the little clipper here and the clipper here, and then the stake, and then the plastic thing. Whereas drip, it's just one line. You just lay it out like, I think that's more simple.
Great tip. And I like to conclude our webinar with the comment from Max. Said, Tia live from the log cabin, always informative and entertaining. Thank you so much, Tia. This is a great talk.
Thank you for having me, and I'll see you guys next time.
Thank you. Thank you, Tia, and thank you everyone for joining us today at Water Wednesday, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your Wednesday afternoon, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.